you know, and these literally were the most horrendous customers I've ever talked to. And on a good day, they were horrible. And when the pandemic hit and closed everything down, they were just like 3-year-old toddlers throwing tantrums that just would not quit. And then they would do it again the next day, you know. And an unfortunate truth about the elderly and people aged of a certain, you know, getting to a certain age demographic. And I'm not saying this in a, you know, any kind of sarcastic or, you know, mean way, but they can sometimes be dealing with mental illness. And some of them were on pain medications, and that's nobody's business, but you can kind of tell when you started dealing with it long enough. And prior to having worked for this company, several years ago, I worked at a medical alarm company, and the predominant demographic of that company was the elderly. And a lot of them were suffering mental illness because they were a certain age and because they started to develop signs of dementia and Alzheimer's. You know what you're hearing on the phone. You start to get an idea of what's happening. You know, when you have a customer who's, you know, setting off their medical alarm because they see somebody sitting out on their roof and they're looking at them and, you know, telling, or somebody's in their hallway and, you know, putting the lights on and, you know, I'm not saying this to make fun of them. I'm saying it's very real. So you start to understand like what you're dealing with on the phone, and you know, you don't realize there are more people suffering from mental illness in that demographic than you'd even think, and they really are. But with the dementia and the Alzheimer comes a real nastiness. And a denial and an unacceptance that they have a mental illness. They don't want to accept it. So they will abuse whoever they can. And it just got too much. And I left in the fall of 2020. Fast forward to March of 2021, they call me back and ask me, this is the company I just left, asked me if I'd come back and I would work remotely because everybody in the office was out sick. So they needed somebody desperately. I get all my equipment, I get set up in my home, in my crib here and everything like that. And I'm all happy because I'm going to be in my own space. I don't have to worry about getting up and getting dressed, going to work. I can just be here. And that was good for about 4 months. And it got really depressing and really dark. And I was like, this is affecting my mental health and I have to quit. And so, you know, I made that decision. I started looking for another job. Now, click the plus sign for part 3.